going to show you how to make a reversible tote shopping bag from this lovely little woodland themed fabric. So I have just over half a metre of 115 centimetre wide fabric. So this is your regular craft fabric. This is polyester cotton, and here's the coordinating print. So I'm going to take the fabric I want to be the main, which is this one, and I'm going to fold it in half. Now pay attention to which way I'm folding this, because I want the animals to be at the top, obviously. So you can fold it with right sides together or right sides facing in, it doesn't matter, as long as you sew it the correct way. So I'm going to fold it in half. Now, I've made a pattern because I make of these bags. So my pattern is 45 centimetres wide by 50 centimetres from top to bottom, and I've cut 2 squares out of the bottom corners, which are 8 centimetres by 8 centimetres. If you don't want to make a pattern, then you can just chalk this onto your fabric. By measuring whatever distance you want the bag to be. As I said, mine is 45 centimetres wide, so I'd measure 45 across here, 45 across at the bottom, 50 centimetres down, and 50 centimetres down this side. Cut that out, then cut your little 8 centimetre squares out of the 2 bottom corners. So I'm just going to start by pinning my fabric onto my, pinning the pattern onto the fabric rather. And I can remove the pattern piece because I'm going to use that again. Right, still got the handles to do. I've prepared the inner or lining for the bag. Notice that I haven't folded it exactly in half, it's slightly off centre. So I've got my pattern, or you would draw the bag shape on again, and you will have one piece left over which should be around 20 centimetres. So that is what's going to form the little storage pouch for your bag. So I'm just going to cut around this bag. Again, I want 2 pieces. So to recap, I have 2 pieces in the main fabric for the bag shape, 2 pieces in the contrast of the bag shape, 2 handles, and 1 larger piece for the pouch, which I'm going to set aside for the time being. Okay, to prepare the first section, I've taken the outer bag pieces and placed them right sides together. So the wide end is at the top, the 2 squares cut out are the bottom corners. So I'm not going to sew along the top, I'm going to sew down each side and across the shorter section at the bottom. I'm going to use a 1 centimetre seam allowance, so that's the 10mm marking on your sewing machine. I'm going to start with some back stitch. You see I've pinned my edges together. Back stitch at the end. Cut my threads now for the other side. That's both sides done. I'm now going to sew across the small section at the bottom. Again, also 1 centimetre seam allowance, 10mm, also back stitching at each end. First side done, so I've stitched down each side and across the bottom. You'll note I have not sewn round the corners yet, so I'll put that to one side. I'm going to do the lining. Now, this is reversible, so it doesn't really matter what side is the outside and what's the lining, but for the purposes of making the bag, if you designate your two fabrics, it makes it easier to remember what you're doing. So I'm going to do the same on the lining. Let's sew down the two long sides. Now, I haven't bothered to change my thread colour. The other long side. Also back stitched at each end of that seam. Now this time when I do the short section across the bottom, I'm going to leave a gap in the middle for turning out. So it's two short sides. I'm going to leave approximately 1/3 of it open in the middle. these ends off because that really rattles my cage. Just having ends trailing. Right. Now we're going to do the corners. So I'm going to take the corners and open them out, pull them apart like it was a bag of crisps, and I'm flattening, so I'm pulling the side seam to the bottom seam. I'm going to open out, spread out these seam allowances, and I'm going to pin those in place so they don't pop out. Then I'm going to sew right across that bottom corner from one fold right down to the other fold. Again, trying to keep my raw edges even. Let me show that again with the second corner. Open it out, bringing these seams together. And flattening this out, like so. Spread open the seam allowances, and this is called boxed corners, which gives your bag a three-dimensional shape. And again, sewing across right the way down here, using a 1 centimetre seam allowance, back stitching at each end. So now we have something which is starting to look something remotely bag-shaped. So I'm going to repeat that corner process with the lining and the other two corners. So I'll be back soon. Okay, I have my outer bag with box corners and the lining also with box corners and a little gap. If you've forgotten to leave the gap in your lining, just unpick that little bit, it'll get sewn up later. So now I'm going to take my handles and I'll go and prepare them on the ironing board. Okay, I have my two long strips, so I'm going to take the first one, fold it right side facing out in half along its length and just press it lightly. Okay, then to open it out and fold the sides into the middle where the creases. I'll just do this one side at a time. Then I'm going to fold in half again, so the two folded edges I'm bringing together and press for a final time. So I now have a handle which is 1/4 of the original width. And I'm going to repeat for the second handle. So now we're going to stitch the handles. So the first thing I want to do is to close this gap and stitch the two folded sides together. I want to do that very close to the edge. If you don't, if you stitch in here somewhere, this bit is going to open. So I'm going to do an edge stitch, which is about 2 or 3 millimeters away from an edge. So I have a lovely little guide on my foot, but if you don't have this shape of foot, I find a zip foot is very useful for getting a close stitch. Now, it doesn't matter if you back stitch at the beginning or not, because the edges will be enclosed in the seam of your bag later. I'm going to repeat for the other side. Not strictly necessary, but I think it gives quite a nice balanced look. It also helps with the strength of the handle. That is the handle, edge stitched down both sides. I'm now going to repeat that for the second handle. I'm going to attach the handles now to the bag. So I'm going to turn the bag right side out and lay it flat on the table. So I have the top edges. I'm going to take the first handle and place it. So the way to ensure you don't get the handle twisted is to hold it at each end and place it like so. So the handle sits in a U shape. And I'm just going to eyeball this. So approximately 1/3 of the way across. You can measure it if you would like to. I think I'm managing to conquer my OCD. And I'm just going to pin that in place. Now I'm only pinning through one layer. There we go. Now I've left about 2 centimetres of bag of the handle protruding from the top edge. I'm going to flip over and position the second handle in the same way. Right, now I'm just going to do a quick stitch to hold those in place. This is not the final stitching, it's just a holding stitch. This stage just makes it easier when you're putting the two bag sections together, that the handles are held in place and they are actually at 90 degrees. So I'm going to stitch not 1 centimetre down, just slightly within that, so within the seam allowance, then the stitching won't be seen. So I use the edge of my presser foot against the edge of the fabric, which will give you about 7mm in most cases, and you don't even need to backstitch, although I generally can't help myself. Second side of the handle. And you want to repeat that with the second handle. Now, that is the bag with the handle secured. So I'm now going to take the bag and put it into the lining. Yes, I know that's the wrong way round. It will all come right in the end. So the lining is still inside out. This is the wrong side, that's the inside, the right side. I'm going to gather up the bag. So the bag is the right side out. So what we've got is right sides together. Okay, so the bag goes inside the lining. I'm going to take my side seams and match those together to open the seam allowances so they're flat. And I'm going to pin all the way around the top edge of the bag. Now notice the handles are down between the two layers. And because the handles are stitched on now, it makes them a little bit securer and it makes the stage easier. Otherwise, if they were still pinned on, they'd be wiggling about, and they usually end up a bit squint. So I'm working my way around. If you've done a good job of sewing the bag and the lining, they will be exactly the same size and the side seams should meet up. Edges together. Right, now I'm going to sew that. You'll probably find the next step a bit easier if you use your free arm of your machine, and if you don't know how to get that, Generally your accessories case on the front can pull off. And there's your free arm. What this will allow me to do is to slip anything tubular, so sleeves or trouser legs or indeed bags, onto the arm of the machine. Now I, for some reason, always want to start at a side seam, so I'm going to be sewing through the 2 layers, and this is round the top edge of the bag. So back stitch to start with. Just working my way around, keeping the fabric edges level. The machine's vibrating a bit, so I've brought it closer to the edge of the table. Naughty, I sewed over a pin. Didn't hit it, thankfully. When you put your pins in at 90 degrees like this, it's easy to whip them out before you get to them with the needle, but if you do accidentally run over one, the machine's far less likely to actually hit the pin. Coming back round to my starting point, so just stitch over the top and a little bit back stitching. So now we are ready for the big reveal. So I'm going to reach into the lining. Remember that gap we left? And we're going to pull the bag through. So this is a bag being born. And indeed this procedure is called bagging out when you fully line something. It means we don't have to do any neatening of raw edges. Right, so there is our bag, there is our lining. So I am going to stitch along there. Before I do that, I'm going to change my thread colour. I think I lied about me conquering the OCD. Right, I'm going to take the edges of the lining, place them together. You can press that with the iron or just finger press it. And that is the gap we left open, so I'm just going to put a pin in there so we can see how far we have to sew. Mainly for the benefit of the camera. And again, I just want to bring those edges together and sew very close to that edge. So using my edge stitching setting, and I'm going to slightly double back over the bit that's already stitched, and continue down to close the gap. You could slip stitch that by hand if you wanted to. So there's a couple of stages now that we can neaten up just to give it a better finish. One of which is trimming all these ends off. So I'm going to go back to the iron and give this a quick press. So what I'm going to do is just open up this seam. So I want that to be nice and flat. If I didn't press that far and open first and try to tuck this down, I'd get a sort of rather fat, very rough looking edge. So by going round to that seam first, pressing it open, I'm just exerting a light pressure. Right, now we have that seam open. We can put the lining down into the bag. So if you were confused where the handles were going in between the two layers, you can see now they have re-emerged when we turned it through. And I'm going to give this edge another press now to flatten the lining on the inside. Just working it with my fingers to produce a knife edge. And it really makes a difference, this little pressing stage. Look at that lovely crisp edge we have on there now. So that is our bag finished. I'm just going to show you now how to do a little cosmetic touch, some top stitching around the edge just to give it that final extra something, and it also helps keep the layers together and keep the lining inside. So again, I'm going to just pop it over the edge of my machine. I'm first going to do an edge stitch. So again, to recap, that's about 2 to 3 millimeters from an edge. Still with my regular 2.5 millimeter stitch length, right round the top edge of the bag. Just pull the handle out the way Now, because we're sewing through the handles as well at this stage, it's helping reinforce the handle. I haven't speeded the video up, that's how fast I normally sew, honest. Back to my starting point. In case you hadn't noticed, I left my green bobbin on the bottom and changed the top for the off-white again. So the stitching underneath on the lining is a matching colour. Yep, the OCD is definitely back. I'm going to do another row about, let's think, 20 millimetres in from the top edge. Feel the thickness of the handles if you've protruded the handles down into the bag. So again, we're reinforcing the stitching, holding them on. Once again, I'm back to where I started, just joining up the stitching. A little bit back stitch to secure, and I'm done. Stay with me and I'll show you how to make the storage pouch. Oh, gorgeous. I want to keep that one myself. To make a storage pouch for your folding bag, I've taken the strip that I saved earlier and I've trimmed it to 46 centimetres long by 17 centimetres wide. So I'm going to press a small hem at the bottom, so a double hem, 1 centimetre, and then another centimetre. On the top edge, I'm going to turn in 1 centimetre, and then about 4 centimetres. then I'm going to stitch those hems down. So first the bottom, and I'm just going to stitch close to the edge, which is known as edge stitching, strangely enough. So start with reverse. And on the top section, again, one reverse start. And that is our double hems done, top and bottom. So just trimming off my thread ends. Then I'm going to bring the lower edge up to meet the top edge. Like so. It's just sitting under the top flap. I'm going to turn that flap back on itself. Okay, so making a little sort of Z fold. So bottom edge comes up, top edge goes back, and I'm going to sew down either side. So I'm going to use about a 1 centimetre seam allowance. That's the 10mm marking on your sewing machine. I'm going to do the same on the other side. So that's both edges stitched down either side. So I'm going to go and give that a quick press, and I'm going to trim it. So edges pressed. Now this is a French seam which is going to enclose these edges. So I'm trimming back to about 3mm. So I'm taking about 2/3 of the seam allowance away. So you have to be quite brave. Right, now I'm going to turn the fabric wrong side out. You do have to be quite gentle, or you can burst the seam open. So poking out the corners. I'm going to flatten that, open that seam out there, and then fold it so the seam lies on the edge. And just give that a really light press to sharpen up that edge. And I'm going to do the same on the other side. seam to is now open, and then fold in half, press again. Now I'm going to go back to the machine and I'm going to stitch down either side, which will create a little channel which locks away your edges and gives a much hard wearing finish. Right, I want to finish off my French seams by stitching a second line about 5mm in from the edge. So 5mm is roughly just before your second feed dog. So I'm going to line it up. There we go, and that's about right. And if you've trimmed the raw edges far enough, this will completely enclose your raw edges and protect them. Quite thick, so tugging on the threads to help the machine pull the fabric through. First side done. Turn back to the right side, and that is our little storage pouch for our bag. So again, I'm going to give those edges a little bit of a press. I roll that corner, that's encouraging the seam to pop out the way. I think I'm going to give it a little bit of a press anyway. So here's my finished storage pouch, my finished bag. So to fold the bag, we're going to flatten it and bring the bottom up. Then I'm going to turn the edges in about a third of the way. To fold the bag in half, bring the handles in, then fold in half again. Pop it into its sack, perfect fit, and the flap at the back can come forward. And there you go, beautiful little gift for someone, or for your next trip to the supermarket.